The gallows stood beside the Auschwitz crematorium on a gray morning in April 1947. Rudolf Höss, the man who turned extermination into an industrial operation, walked toward death with steady steps. For years, he had directed the largest Nazi concentration camp with bureaucratic precision, sending more than 1 million people to the gas chambers. But Höss was not a loud sadist. He was a methodical bureaucrat. He whistled operas while signing execution orders. And at night, he helped his children with their homework in a house just a few meters from the crematorium. He lived between two worlds, the home and the hell he had designed. What drove this unremarkable soldier to become one of the most methodical killers in history? What fate awaited the man who tucked his children into bed before going out to supervise genocide? The origin of the executioner begins in a broken childhood. Baden-Baden, 1900. In this prosperous spa town in southwestern Germany, Rudolf Höss was born. He was the only son of Franz Xavier Höss, a merchant and former military officer with colonial experience in German East Africa. The family was deeply Catholic, and his father intended for young Rudolf to enter the priesthood. Under that strict discipline, the boy developed an introverted, obedient personality, traits that would define his adult life. Then came the rupture. The death of his father in 1914 coincided with the outbreak of the First World War, and that moment radically changed the teenager's fate. Freed from the pressure of an ecclesiastical future, Höss was drawn toward military life, carried by the nationalist fervor sweeping German society. At just 15 years old, he forged documents to enlist in the German army, first serving as a medical assistant. Soon he was sent to the Eastern Front, then to campaigns in Turkey, Palestine, and Iraq. At 17, he became a non-commissioned officer, one of the youngest to hold that rank. He received both the first and second-class Iron Crosses, distinctions he carried with pride for the rest of his life. During those years, Hess saw the brutality of war at close range. He may also have witnessed the Armenian genocide carried out by the Turks. These experiences helped normalize systematic violence in his mind. When Germany was defeated in 1918 and humiliated by the Treaty of Versailles, resentment took root in the young veteran. He was not alone. Thousands of former soldiers felt the same bitterness, and post-war Germany became fertile ground for extremist movements. Like many demobilized veterans, Hess found in the Freikorps a place to channel his anger. These far-right paramilitary groups, made up largely of former soldiers, were fiercely anti-communist and violently opposed to the fragile Weimar Republic. During his 20s, Hess took part in operations against communist insurgents in regions such as the Ruhr and Upper Silesia. Political violence became his environment. Radical nationalist circles became his home. In 1922, after hearing Adolf Hitler speak in Munich, Höss joined the National Socialist Party with membership number 3,240, making him one of its earliest members. But his radicalization did not stop there. In 1923, he took part in the murder of Walter Kado, a school teacher accused of betraying a German saboteur who had been executed by the French authorities. Alongside Martin Bormann, the future secretary to Hitler, and other Freikorps members, Höss beat Kado to death in a forest near Parchim. For that crime, he received a 10-year prison sentence. Prison did not break him, it sharpened him. During his imprisonment, Höss deepened his nationalist and anti-Semitic worldview through reading and through conversations with other political prisoners. He served only 5 years, benefiting from a political amnesty in 1928, a sign of the growing strength of far-right forces in pre-Nazi Germany. After his release, Höss tried to build something that looked like stability. He joined the Ardeman League, a Völkisch organization that promoted a return to rural life and the ideal of German racial purity. There he encountered two people who would shape his future: Heinrich Himmler, the future head of the SS, and Hedwig Hensel, the woman who would become his wife and the mother of his 5 children. Then, the crisis deepened. The economic collapse of 1929 and the widespread discontent across Germany accelerated the rise of Nazism. When Hitler came to power in 1933, Höss saw a new opportunity to serve the nationalist cause. In 1934, at Himmler's invitation, he joined the SS with membership number 193,616. That step marked the beginning of his career inside the machinery of the Nazi concentration camp system. His entry into the SS came at a decisive moment. Hitler had crushed internal opposition after the Night of the Long Knives and was institutionalizing repression through a camp network first aimed at political enemies. Dachau, established in March 1933 outside Munich, became the model. It was there that Höss began his apprenticeship in terror under Theodor Reicke, the architect of the concentration camp system. Reicke, commander of Dachau since June 1933, built a regime on three foundations: systematic terror against prisoners, ideological indoctrination of the SS guards, and ruthless administrative efficiency. He established the camp regulations known as discipline and punishment, turning cruelty into a method of control. Höss absorbed every lesson. He began as a Blockführer, responsible for a barracks of prisoners. There he learned how to apply collective punishment and how to spread distrust among inmates so that solidarity could never grow. His efficiency brought rapid promotion to Rapportführer, where he supervised other Blockführer and organized the dreaded daily roll calls, forcing prisoners to stand for hours in the open air. The brutality at Dachau was not random. It was measured, ordered, rationalized. Höss internalized the principle that terror should be administered as a system. That lesson would later define Auschwitz. He watched as Reicke transformed young guards into impassive executioners through ideological indoctrination, militarized camaraderie, and gradual desensitization to human suffering. In 1938, Höss took a major step forward when he was transferred to Sachsenhausen near Berlin. It was a promotion. He became assistant to the commander, Hermann Baranowski, another disciple of Reicke. Sachsenhausen, built in 1936, incorporated architectural innovations such as a triangular layout designed to maximize surveillance from a central tower. There, Höss refined the administrative side of terror. He became known for efficiency in camp logistics and for his ability to implement new methods of control. He supervised executions, organized forced labor, and enforced discipline with military precision. One revealing episode came during the winter of 1939 to 1940, when he ordered prisoners not assigned to work details to remain outdoors for hours in sub-zero temperatures. Many had no proper coats. Dozens died from frostbite. When some tried to reach the infirmary, Hess ordered the doors closed. That moment exposed a central truth about him. He was willing to sacrifice human beings without hesitation if it served order and discipline. During these years, his relationship with Himmler also grew stronger. The Reichsfuhrer SS saw in Höss the perfect subordinate, disciplined, methodical, obedient, ideologically committed. That relationship would become decisive in May 1940. When Höss was chosen to command a new camp in occupied Poland. On the 1st of May 1940, Rudolf Höss took command of a new concentration camp established on a former Polish military base near the town of Auschwitz, renamed by the Germans as Auschwitz. At first, it was conceived as a detention center for members of the Polish resistance. No one yet imagined that under Hess's command, this site would become the epicenter of the most systematic genocide in history. The choice of location was no accident. Auschwitz offered strategic advantages that Höss recognized immediately. It stood at a railway junction connecting multiple regions of Europe. It had broad land for expansion. It was isolated enough to operate discreetly, yet close enough to industrial centers to exploit captive labor. During his first year as commander, Höss supervised the conversion of the old military buildings and the construction of new facilities using forced prisoner labor. The original Auschwitz camp could hold around 10,000 inmates, mostly Polish political prisoners and some Jews from the surrounding region. Then, in March 1941, Heinrich Himmler visited Auschwitz and was impressed by Höss's management. He ordered a major expansion to hold an additional 30,000 prisoners, anticipating a flood of detainees after the coming invasion of the Soviet Union. More importantly, during that visit or in later meetings that summer, Himmler informed Höss that Auschwitz would become the principal center for implementing the final solution, the plan for the systematic extermination of Europe's Jews. Höss received the mission the way he received everything else, with bureaucratic discipline. He did not protest. He did not hesitate. He began planning. His goal was not simply to kill. His goal was to build a system, a machine, an industrial process that could eliminate the largest possible number of victims with the smallest possible logistical burden. Under his supervision, The construction of Auschwitz II, Birkenau, began in October 1941 in the nearby village of Brzezinka. This second camp was far larger than the first and was designed specifically as a center for mass extermination. Every element of its planning reflected an industrial mentality. The process had to be faster, cleaner, more efficient. Victims had to be processed in enormous numbers. Resources had to be minimized. Personnel had to be used with maximum effect. By September 1941, Hus had already overseen experiments with Zyklon B, a cyanide-based pesticide, in the basement of Block 11 at Auschwitz I. Soviet prisoners were used as guinea pigs. From those killings, he concluded that Zyklon B was more efficient and less psychologically burdensome for the executioners than mass shootings or the carbon monoxide methods used elsewhere. Satisfied with the results, Hess adapted Crematorium I at Auschwitz into a functioning gas chamber. But even that would soon prove insufficient. Crematorium I quickly proved too small for the scale of murder that Hus and his superiors envisioned. In Birkenau, 4 vast extermination complexes were built, each with gas chambers designed to kill up to 2,000 people at one time, and crematoria meant to erase the bodies. Step by step, the process was refined until it reached a terrifying industrial efficiency. Train transports arrived directly at a ramp inside Birkenau. From there, the new arrivals were divided in seconds through a rapid selection carried out by SS doctors. Those considered capable of work were admitted temporarily into the camp. The rest, the elderly, the sick, children, women with babies, and anyone judged too weak, were sent straight to death. They were told they were going to shower. They were instructed to remember where they had left their clothes and belongings, so that the illusion of return would remain alive until the final moment. Inside the chambers, once the doors were sealed, SS personnel introduced Zyklon B crystals through openings in the roof or walls. Death by asphyxiation usually came within about 20 minutes, though the agony could last longer. After that, the Sonderkommando, prisoners forced to work in the extermination facilities, dragged out the bodies, pulled gold teeth from the dead, and fed the corpses into the crematory ovens. When the ovens could no longer keep pace, especially during the deportation of Hungarian Jews in 1944, bodies were burned in huge open pits. Hus managed this killing system with the mind of an industrial administrator. He kept detailed records. He optimized procedures. He solved logistical problems. In his own autobiography, he described the extermination process at Auschwitz in chillingly administrative language. The Jews selected for extermination, he wrote, were taken as quietly as possible to the crematoria. Men were separated from women and children. They were led into the gas chamber, a large room made to look like a shower. First came the women with the children, then the men, always in smaller groups. Everything, he noted, took place in absolute calm. Many times, the victims already knew they were about to be gassed. In November 1943, Hus was temporarily removed from command of Auschwitz after an extramarital affair with a political prisoner was discovered. That episode, strange and almost absurd beside the scale of his crimes, revealed a disturbing contradiction. A man capable of participating in the largest genocide in history still carried ordinary human weaknesses: vanity, desire, private disorder. But his absence would not last. In the spring of 1944, with Germany collapsing on every front, the Nazi regime accelerated the extermination of Europe's Jews with renewed urgency. The focus now turned to Hungary, where the Jewish community had remained largely intact until then. To oversee this final surge of murder, Rudolf Höss was brought back. Temporarily sidelined since 1943, he was still regarded as indispensable. His cold efficiency, his mastery of camp logistics, his proven ability to manage genocide on a mass scale made him the man the regime needed at that moment. On March 19, 1944, Germany occupied Hungary during Operation Margaret. Although Hungary had been an Axis ally since 1941, its leader, Miklos Horthy, had until then resisted the mass deportation of the country's roughly 800,000 Jews. That population made up around 5% of Hungary's total population and was deeply woven into the country's cultural and economic life. With the German occupation, everything changed. A collaborationist government under dömestújai Washingtonled. The persecution began immediately. Jews were forced to wear the yellow star. Their property was confiscated. They were herded into overcrowded makeshift ghettos. Adolf Rickman, the logistical architect of the deportations, arrived quickly in Budapest at the head of the so-called Sonderkommando Ikman, a unit created specifically to organize the extermination of Hungarian Jews. The operation was officially named Action Höss, an unusual and direct acknowledgement of the man chosen to execute it. On May 8, 1944, Höss returned to Auschwitz with a specific mission personally assigned by Heinrich Himmler: exterminate the Hungarian Jews as fast as possible. He did not formally resume his position as overall camp commander, but he assumed a special role as Himmler's plenipotentiary, controlling every operational and logistical aspect of the killing process. In the months that followed, Auschwitz was transformed into an even more ruthless machine. Between May and July of 1944, approximately 430,000 Jews were transported there on more than 140 trains. The coordination required between German and Hungarian authorities was exact. Even trains needed for the war effort were rerouted toward Auschwitz. The message was unmistakable. For the Nazi regime, extermination was not secondary to military victory. It was central to it. To increase efficiency even further, Hess ordered key improvements to the camp infrastructure. A new railway platform, the Birkenau ramp, was built directly in front of the gas chambers. This reduced the time between arrival and murder to the bare minimum. Auschwitz now operated as a literal death production line. During the peak of this operation, the Nazi killing machine reached its highest capacity. On the most intense days, the camp processed up to 12,000 victims daily, an unprecedented scale even within the history of the Holocaust. Selections were made with brutal speed. SS doctors such as Josef Mengele decided with a motion of the hand who would live temporarily as slave labor and who would die immediately. Only between 10% and 30% were kept alive for work. The rest, especially children, elderly people, and women with small children, were sent directly to the gas chambers without even being registered. Very quickly, the pace of killing surpassed the technical capacity of the 4 crematoria at Birkenau. They had originally been designed to incinerate around 4,400 corpses per day. During Action Höss, that number was often effectively doubled. To deal with the overflow, Höss authorized open-air cremations. Huge pits were dug in the nearby woods. Thousands of bodies were burned there each day in giant pyres fueled by wood and by human fat taken from the victims themselves. To accelerate the burning, chemical substances such as methanol were used. Handling the bodies were the Sonderkommandos, Jewish prisoners forced into special labor units inside the extermination system. Their psychological torment was beyond language. They knew they were helping destroy evidence of the murdered. They also knew they themselves would be killed periodically so that the secret of the operation could be preserved. The atmosphere in Auschwitz during those weeks seemed to belong to another world, a world beneath humanity. Black smoke rose constantly into the sky, visible from miles away. The smell of burnt flesh spread through every corner of the camp and beyond it. Survivors later described scenes that no mind should be made to hold. Elie Wiesel, deported from Hungary in May 1944, wrote in Night of the emotional devastation of witnessing the burning of small children, a scene so unreal it seemed impossible even while it happened. Rudolf Verba, who escaped the camp shortly before the operation, explained that Auschwitz had been reorganized entirely for one purpose: to exterminate Hungarian Jews with maximum speed. Historian Raoul Hilberg would later describe this operation as the culmination of a long evolutionary process in which death had become fully mechanized. Under Hess's personal direction, Auschwitz became an extermination factory in the most literal sense, a place where industrial efficiency and ideological hatred fused into one system. And the most chilling fact of all was the historical context. Germany was already losing the war. The resources consumed by this operation could have been used at the Eastern Front, where the Soviet advance threatened total collapse. Yet the Nazi leadership continued to prioritize murder. That decision exposed the true nature of the regime. For its leaders, exterminating the Jews was not just a goal among others. It stood alongside military victory as an obsession of equal weight. The operation ended abruptly in early July 1944. Miklos Horthy, at least partly informed about the fate awaiting the deportees through the famous Verba-Wetzler report prepared by 2 Auschwitz escapees, ordered the deportations halted under mounting international pressure. especially from Sweden and the Vatican. In just 56 days, this final major Nazi operation killed more people than the populations of major European cities such as Amsterdam or Naples at the time. Even then, around 200,000 Jews still remained in Budapest. Their deportation was suspended for political reasons, but many would later die under the fascist Arrow Cross regime supported by Germany. After completing the mission, Höss left Auschwitz in August 1944 to assume a higher bureaucratic role in the Central Concentration Camp Administration at Oranienburg near Berlin. From there, he continued to manage administrative aspects of the Nazi camp system until the war's end, including the death marches that killed tens of thousands more in the final months of the conflict. In December 1944, he returned one last time to Auschwitz to inspect the camp's evacuation as the Soviet army approached. His concern was not the prisoners. It was the destruction of evidence, the elimination of documents, the concealment of what had been done. Then the Reich collapsed. In the spring of 1945, as Allied forces closed in from every direction, senior Nazi officials understood that the end had come. Hitler killed himself in his Berlin bunker on April 30th. The armies of the Allies moved deep into German territory. Rudolf Höss knew his name stood high on the list of wanted war criminals. For a man who had planned genocide with relentless care, survival now became another operation to be managed. Following instructions given by Heinrich Himmler during their final meeting in March 1945, Höss received false papers identifying him as Friedrich Lang, a sailor in the German Navy. He was told to stay away from big cities, avoid his family, and seek work in isolated rural areas, preferably on farms, where he could disappear among the displaced and defeated. These instructions were not improvised. They were part of a broader Nazi fantasy that some leaders still clung to in the war's final phase, the dream of a future Fourth Reich. Selected SS members were encouraged to blend quietly into post-war German society, maintain contacts, and wait for a future conflict between the Western powers and the Soviet Union. The so-called werewolf or Odessa networks never fulfilled those ambitions, but they did help many war criminals escape or hide. Höss followed the plan exactly. After Germany's formal surrender on May 8, 1945, he moved north to Schleswig-Holstein near the Danish border. The choice was calculated. The area was rural, relatively isolated, and crowded with refugees, ex-soldiers, and displaced civilians trying to rebuild shattered lives. It was the perfect cover. For almost a year, Höss remained uncaptured, longer than many Nazi figures of similar rank. Under the name Franz Lang, not Friedrich as some mistaken accounts later claimed, he worked as a farm laborer near Gottrapel in the region around Flensburg, only a few kilometers from Denmark. His appearance helped him vanish. A middle-aged man. Quiet, hard-working, unremarkable. In the wreckage of post-war Germany, he looked like thousands of others. But the machinery of justice was beginning to take shape. The International Military Tribunal at Nuremberg had been established in August 1945, and its proceedings began in November. Evidence and testimony there gradually revealed the full scope of the concentration camp system, bringing Auschwitz and its former commander into sharp focus. British investigators in the northern occupation zone, where Höss was hiding, pursued him carefully. The War Crimes Investigation Unit, led by Lieutenant Colonel Gerald Draper, built a network of informants and applied increasingly systematic intelligence methods. The breakthrough came through his family. Investigators located Hedwig Höss and the children in Sankt Michael im Lungau, a small Austrian town in the American occupation zone. Hedwig had been exchanging coded letters with her husband. She was detained and interrogated. According to some accounts, including the recollection of Captain William Cross, the British officers applied strong psychological pressure and made veiled threats involving the children, especially her son Klaus. After days of resistance, and reportedly after being told that Klaus might be handed over to the Soviets, Hedwig finally gave up crucial details about her husband's location and his false identity. On March 11, 1946, nearly 1 year after the collapse of Nazi Germany, the capture operation began. A special British unit from the 92nd Field Security Regiment, led by Captain William Cross, surrounded the farm at Gottrapel, where the fugitive was working. There was a harsh irony in who helped bring him down. One of the key officers involved was Hans Alexander, a German Jew who had fled to England in 1936 to escape Nazi persecution. He later joined the British Army and dedicated himself to tracking war criminals. Members of his own family had been lost in the Holocaust. Now he stood at the edge of the operation that would finally expose the man who had commanded Auschwitz. The raid came in the early hours of the morning. British soldiers stormed the farm while Huss was asleep in a small barn converted into workers' quarters. Pulled from his cot wearing only his underwear, he immediately produced his false documents and insisted that he was Franz Lang. At first glance, the story almost worked. He looked like what he claimed to be: a tired, middle-aged laborer, another defeated German trying to survive. But Hans Alexander had already received detailed information from Hedwig Höss. He watched closely, and then one tiny detail shattered the disguise. Höss was still wearing his wedding ring, hidden beneath a bandage he claimed covered a wound. When the soldiers inspected it, they found the inscriptions inside: his name, his wife's name, the date of their marriage. In that instant, the lie collapsed. Faced with proof he could not escape, he admitted that he was Rudolf Höss, the former commandant of Auschwitz. The exact details of what followed in those first hours remain historically controversial. By several accounts, including Höss's own later memoirs, he was subjected to rough treatment, beatings, forced wakefulness, and intense physical and psychological pressure. Hans Alexander would later acknowledge that he allowed Höss to be slapped and deprived of sleep for 3 straight days. Other accounts suggest treatment even harsher, methods that today would be classified as torture. These facts do not erase Höss's crimes, but they do raise difficult questions about the line between justice and vengeance, even in the aftermath of horrors almost impossible to comprehend. Once his identity was confirmed, Höss began cooperating with surprising openness. He was first transferred to a detention center in Heide and later to Minden Prison, the main British interrogation center for major Nazi suspects. Unlike many other Nazi officials who denied knowledge or responsibility, Höss adopted a coldly technical posture. He provided detailed descriptions of how the extermination system had functioned. He did not speak like a man haunted by conscience. He spoke like an administrator explaining a completed project. On April 5, 1946, Höss signed an affidavit laying out his role in the Holocaust. The document, first drafted in English and later translated into German for his signature, became one of the most explicit confessions ever recorded about the Nazi extermination system. It was later catalogued in the Nuremberg files as document PS3868. In it, Höss declared with chilling bureaucratic calm that he had commanded Auschwitz until December 1, 1943, and estimated that at least 2.5 million victims had been executed and exterminated there by gassing and cremation, while another 500,000 had died from hunger and disease, for a total of about 3 million dead. He added that this represented roughly 70 to 80% of all those sent to Auschwitz, with the remainder selected for forced labor. Later, Höss would revise those figures downward, placing the total number of victims at around 1.1 million, a number much closer to the estimates accepted by historians today. The discrepancy may reflect the effects of brutal interrogation, uncertainty over exact totals, or an attempt to satisfy what he believed his interrogators expected to hear. But on the essential point, he never retreated. He never denied the extermination. He never denied his role inside it. His defense, from start to finish, rested on one central claim: that he was a functionary carrying out orders in a hierarchical system. On April 15, 1946, Höss appeared at the International Military Tribunal in Nuremberg. He was not one of the main defendants, but his testimony was pivotal in proving the systematic and premeditated character of the genocide. Ironically, he took the stand as a defense witness for Ernst Kaltenbrunner, but what he said only deepened the case against the Nazi leadership. With the same administrative precision that had defined his career, he described the gas chambers, the selection process, and the disposal of the bodies. It was not a confession delivered with tears. It was an operational briefing from one of the chief managers of industrial mass murder. The American prosecutor Whitney Harris, visibly shaken, asked him directly whether he had personally overseen the execution of more than 2.5 million men, women, and children. Höss answered with a single word: yes. After Nuremberg, Höss was extradited to Poland, the country where Auschwitz stood and where most of his victims had died. On July 30th, 1946, he was handed over to Polish authorities and imprisoned at Mokotów prison in Warsaw. During that imprisonment, he wrote extensive memoirs at the request of his captors. Those autobiographical notes remain one of the most disturbing historical documents of the 20th century. Written without any visible emotional collapse, they reveal the mind of a perpetrator who understood exactly what he had done, yet continued to frame himself as a dutiful official. In those memoirs, Höss described extermination with the detached language of a technician. He wrote that he regarded the gas chambers as a more humane method than shootings. He said he was concerned with carrying out orders, not reflecting on them. He stated that he had always been instructed to destroy the Jews immediately. That language, dry and procedural, has drawn the attention of philosophers, historians, and psychologists for decades. It exposed a terrifying possibility. Evil did not always come wearing the face of madness. Sometimes it wore the face. The trial of Rudolf Höss before the Supreme National Tribunal of Poland began on March 11, 1947. Exactly 1 year after his capture. He was charged with membership in a criminal organization, the SS, with ordering the murder of at least 2.8 million people, mainly Jews, and with crimes against humanity. Polish prosecutors presented extensive documentation on Auschwitz and called survivors who identified Hess as the camp's commandant. Witnesses described his regular presence during selections and his direct supervision of extermination operations. Throughout the proceedings, Höss maintained the same cold, professional attitude that had marked his years at Auschwitz. He did not deny the basic facts, though he disputed some figures. He tried again to portray himself as a subordinate functionary carrying out orders. But unlike other Nazi defendants who denied everything, he did not attempt to erase his personal role. That limited frankness gave the trial an especially grim force. The architect was there, and he was calmly confirming how the machine had worked. On April 2, 1947, the court found him guilty on all charges and sentenced him to death. The judgment was legally precise and morally austere. It established responsibility without ornament. The sentence ordered that the execution be carried out by hanging at a place of profound symbolism, Auschwitz itself, the camp he had commanded and transformed into the central killing site of the Holocaust. In the days before his death, Hess wrote a final statement. In it, he claimed that solitude had forced him to recognize the enormity of what he had done. He wrote that his conscience compelled him to say he had gravely sinned against humanity. He acknowledged that as commandant of Auschwitz, he had carried out part of the cruel plans of the Third Reich for human destruction. He admitted that he had inflicted terrible suffering, especially on the Polish people, and that he would pay for it with his life. That statement remains historically important because few high-ranking perpetrators expressed even that much direct acknowledgement. And yet, no final words could weigh against what he had helped build. No confession could close the distance between language and the reality of what happened inside Auschwitz. Then came the final morning. On April 16, 1947, an unnatural silence hung over Auschwitz. The camp had been emptied of prisoners, but it was about to witness one last act. Survivors and former inmates had specifically requested that Rudolf Höss be executed there, at the site where he had overseen the deaths of more than 1 million people. At 8 o'clock in the morning, a vehicle stopped at the camp entrance. Höss stepped out under Polish guard. He wore a dark coat. His hands were cuffed behind his back. His face remained rigid, disciplined, almost expressionless. The guards first led him into the building that had once housed the camp administration, the same place where he had held office during the years of extermination. There, he asked for one last cup of coffee. The request was almost unbearable in its banality, a final ordinary gesture from a man who had administered extraordinary evil. After drinking slowly, he was taken to Block 11, the so-called death block, where thousands of prisoners had been tortured and shot under his authority. The route was deliberate. He was being made to pass through the architecture of his own crimes. Near Crematorium 1, just a few meters from the former family villa where he had lived with his wife and children, a special gallows had been erected. Around it stood prosecutors, Polish officials, journalists, and some Auschwitz survivors. The structure was simple and functional. There was no spectacle in it, only consequence. At 10 o'clock, Höss was led from Block 11 to the scaffold. He walked without collapsing. A priest, Father Władysław Lone, accompanied him and offered the final rites. Though Hus had long abandoned Catholic practice, he had returned to religious observance during his last days in prison and had gone to confession. Reaching the scaffold, he briefly looked at the structure above him. It was an elevated platform with a trapdoor and a hanging rope. A plain device, efficient, unadorned. It carried the bitter irony of poetic justice. A mechanism not unlike those he had once ordered for others was now waiting for him. Prosecutor Jan Sain, who had led the investigation against him, read out the sentence. It summarized the crimes simply: membership in a criminal organization, responsibility for the murder of millions, crimes against humanity. Hess listened without visible emotion. Because his hands were still tied, he needed help climbing the scaffold steps. A masked executioner waited above. He was given the chance to speak. True to his restrained nature, he said only, "I accept my punishment." Some later claimed he also murmured, "Germany will live forever," though that detail has never been confirmed by all sources. At 10:08 a.m., the executioner removed the support beneath him. The trapdoor opened. The body of the former commandant dropped and hung suspended. Father Lohn began to pray. At 10:21 a.m., a doctor officially pronounced him dead. Rudolf Franz Ferdinand Höss, the man who had turned Auschwitz into a synonym for industrialized extermination, was gone. For the witnesses present, the moment did not produce celebration so much as a grim closing of accounts. Some survivors saw in it a measure of justice, but none believed that any execution could repay what had been done. Kazimierz Smolin, himself a former prisoner who later became director of the Auschwitz State Museum, would recall it as a moment of justice, not of joy. Too many of the dead were missing from that morning. What became of Höss's body remains uncertain. Some accounts say it was cremated and the ashes scattered secretly to prevent the site from becoming a shrine for Nazi sympathizers. Others suggest he was buried in an unmarked grave. The ambiguity is striking. He had overseen a regime obsessed with recording and counting the destruction of others, yet the final fate of his own remains dissolved into uncertainty. And yet the greater legacy was never his body. It was the warning he left behind. The figure of Rudolf Höss has endured because he embodies one of the most disturbing truths of the 20th century. He was not a ranting caricature of evil. He was not theatrical. He was ordinary in manner, disciplined in habit, bureaucratic in thought. That is precisely why he remains so dangerous as a historical lesson. His memoirs, first published in Poland in 1951 under the title Commandant of Auschwitz, do not deny the crimes. They explain them with a technician's calm. He wrote that he believed the gas chambers were a more humane method than shooting. He wrote that he was focused on carrying out orders, not reflecting on them. In those lines, genocide appears not as madness, but as administration. That insight shaped major post-war thinking. Primo Levi, the Italian chemist and Auschwitz survivor, warned that the greatest danger does not lie only in obvious monsters, but in ordinary men willing to believe and obey without question. Hannah Arendt later developed a related idea in her analysis of Adolf Eichmann, describing what she called the banality of evil. Christopher Browning, in Ordinary Men, showed how average individuals under certain social and ideological pressures could become participants in mass murder. These interpretations do not excuse Höss. They make him more frightening. They show that under the right conditions, evil does not always require a beast. Sometimes it requires only obedience, careerism, ideology, and the slow erosion of moral resistance. The physical space of Auschwitz remains as testimony. In 1947, by decision of the Polish parliament, the former camp was turned into a museum and memorial. In 1979, UNESCO designated Auschwitz-Birkenau a World Heritage Site, not for beauty, but for warning. On January 27th, the date of Auschwitz's liberation in 1945, the United Nations established International Holocaust Remembrance Day in 2005. The site endures because the crime must remain visible. Even Höss's family became part of that uneasy afterlife. His descendants lived for decades beneath the weight of a name linked forever to crimes against humanity. His daughter Brigitte lived in anonymity in the United States until journalists traced her in 2013. His son Hans-Jürgen spent years denying the truth before eventually confronting it and speaking publicly about the dangers of extremism. These stories show how the Holocaust continued to echo across generations long after the gallows had done their work. In 2024, the villa where Höss once lived with his family, only meters from the gas chambers, was transformed into the Auschwitz Research Center on hate, extremism, and radicalization. The symbolism could not be sharper. A house once tied to the administrator of genocide was turned into a place meant to study and resist the ideologies that made genocide possible. That is the final meaning of Rudolf Hess. His life shows how, step by step, order by order, task by task, a human being can move from obedience into atrocity. Auschwitz did not erupt out of nowhere. It was built, planned, expanded, optimized. Human decisions made it real. Human beings kept it running. Human beings justified it until the smoke covered the sky, and that is why the story still matters now. Not to dwell on horror for its own sake, but to recognize the signs before they gather again. Dehumanization, blind obedience. The language of efficiency used to erase conscience. The treatment of entire groups as problems to be processed instead of people to be protected. Those are the early steps. That is where the descent begins. To remember Rudolf Höss is not to remember him with fascination. It is to remember what happens when morality collapses under the weight of ideology and routine. It is to remember that industrialized genocide was not the work of mythical creatures, but of men who made choices one after another until millions were dead. The execution of Rudolf Höss ended one life. It did not end the warning. If this story moved you, stay with it. Keep listening, keep remembering, and keep speaking, because history is not only something we study, it is something we defend against by refusing to forget.